the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, April 9th, 2013, getting into the week. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room again, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phones when you call on in. I want to start off with a quick comment. I was watching the corporate media during my show prep today, and CNN seemed to be almost obsessing about this story coming out of Florida, where the parents of two children, apparently there was a big custody fight between the grandparents and the parents. The grandparents had custody. The parents took their kids, and they split, and they were tracked down to Cuba. They're down there in Cuba now. And CNN was just giving us a huge amount of airplay earlier today. It was almost the only thing they're talking about. And I understand for the families, custody situations can be a tragedy. They can be emotionally devastating, but it's not national news. I mean, custody disputes are a common aspect of everyday life in the United States of America, and abductions in the middle of custody cases happen on a pretty regular basis. Why is this news? Because Cuba's involved? Well, that's kind of interesting, because when they first reported this story, nobody knew where the kids went. Oh, the kids have disappeared. Where are the kids? Big head. Oh, they're down in Cuba. And I might be tempted to dismiss this as part of the usual condensation that we've come to expect from the corporate media, except for that other story that we had earlier about how Beyoncé and her significant other went down to Cuba. Horror, 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 which, by the way, is not it's not actually illegal for Americans to visit Cuba. There's a bunch of paperwork you're supposed to fill out. And they're making a big deal about Beyoncé in Cuba. And there was another article that was on the corporate media about, is it time to allow Americans to go to Cuba, to travel to Cuba, which, again, it is legal for Americans to go down there. They're just not supposed to spend any money once they get there, which is kind of an impractical situation. This whole blockade against Cuba, of course, is just this many years on. It's just proof that the United States and the Central Intelligence Agency do know how to carry a grudge into multiple generations. But I have to wonder if all of a sudden this Cuba stuff that's being put up in the corporate media means that Cuba has now made the official U.S. government's strategic high-interest targets list. And it may be the United States saying, well, we've got to prove we can project power into Cuba, or nobody will take us seriously about Iran and North Korea, so we'll see what's going on. Breaking story that's coming on right now, of course, this is coming out of the Lone Star College. There has been a mass assault attack on this college campus. The numbers are fluctuating between 11 and 14 victims so far. One report said they had a suspect in custody. The other one said suspect still at large. What's different about this one is these are stabbings. No guns involved. No shootings. So the White House is already out there saying, we have to ban knives. We have to ban knives and just, make sure the scourge of knives are removed from our society. Look how dangerous these things are. So it actually does put the gun grabbers in a very awkward position, because they very well can't say, oh, well, there were other mitigating circumstances, like the suspect maybe was on prescription antidepressants. They're going to have to now start screaming, we have to ban knives, and nobody's going to buy that. So it could pull the whole legs out from under this whole gun grabber mentality, because when you have a mass stabbing, obviously it's the person committing the crime, not the particular mechanical device being used. Knives do not cause stabbings, cars do not cause drunk driving, and guns do not cause shootings. It's people. Sometimes whacked out on prescription medications, but it's people. I'm going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show and the corporate media. This is the news story that they're going to be selling all day. This multiple stabbing on this college campus. And it does put the gun grabbers in a very awkward position, because their whole attitude has been these mechanical devices are causing the deaths, therefore we must ban them. And so if the gun grabbers start talking about banning knives, it's going to destroy their credibility. And if they back off and say, well, in the case of the stabbing, it was the fault of the suspect, which it was, And especially if it comes out that this suspect, who is now being reported as having been arrested, if it turns out he was on prescription antidepressants, this is a no-win situation for the gun grabbers. Darned if they do and darned if they don't. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Gene in New Jersey. Aloha, Gene. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. Well, I wanted to comment on what you were talking about. It's unfortunate that they have such control of the media and how they played all these things, and a lot of them were I think they call them false flag operations.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of people there in that Connecticut school and stuff like that, and all my friends believe in gun control, and I try to tell them no. They're slanting the story a certain way. Guns, really help people and keep people alive.
Mm-hmm.
There was once a series of movies starring Charles Bronson. There was some kind of vigilante. His wife.
Yeah, I remember those. I was actually an extra really in one of those, and I can't even remember the name of those things.
It was, but at one point, these top police officials, they're having a secret meeting. We got to get him out of here. He's cut the crime rate in half.
Yes.
So eventually they send him off to L.A., and then they kind of see that he's doing the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we don't need to go with the Charles Bronson movie. I mean, the statistics show that when you have legalized gun ownership in a community, crime does go down. And that, of course, means police budgets can be cut, perks for the police leadership get cut, their political influence gets cut. The police thrive only when there's a high crime environment, and there's only a high crime environment when the public is disarmed. That's their agenda for gun control. Although most rank-and-file police favor legalized gun ownership. In fact, we have a story we're talking about later on where one of the most popular police websites conducted a survey of something like 15,000 police officers. And overwhelmingly, the response was limits on magazine are not going to affect crime. Banning certain styles of sporting rifles will not affect crime, mostly because those sporting rifles, the assault rifles, really aren't used all that much for crime. Most gun crime is committed with small concealable handguns. And so absolutely. That's for the police leadership, for the officers, for those who are chief of police and thinking about running for mayor, they need to be shown that they are dealing with the crime and nobody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, Mike, what I wanted to ask you was last week you were talking about something about the stock market.
Yes. Where
there were limits if it goes up or too high or too low.
Yes.
And you said that they got rid of these limits?
No, they moved them. Originally, these limits were put in during some of the more volatile periods of the 1980s and 1990s. But those hard up and hard down limits have been moved to virtually impractical, not likely to see them hit levels. They are still there. And when the market really starts going down, we'll see that hard down limit get hit. That will just panic people even more, and as soon as the limit expires, they'll be back to selling like crazy.
Well, what do you mean when it hits a hard down limit? Did they increase the difference?
No. They don't. All they do is it's a set of levels that are set, and every time the stock market hits that level, going down, trading is suspended with the hope that everybody will take a deep breath and calm down and reevaluate the market and say, hey, it's down, now's the time to be buying in. And then trading will resume, and if it goes down to the next level below that, then they halt trading again. We've actually seen this happen in Europe a couple of times so far this year. And in the United States, we're not seeing that, mostly because we understand our stock market is artificially being propped up with all of this easy money the Federal Reserve is pouring all over Wall Street to the tune of billions of dollars every month that they're just pouring into the market. And we even have some of these key traders coming out and saying, I'm not really a good trader. It's just the Federal Reserve is flooding so much instant cash into the markets. It's all going to go up, and we're all going to make money off of this thing, and it's purely for a political banner so that Obama, like Bill Clinton, can wave the soaring stock market and say, see, the economy is really good. And it's just a political illusion because for most of Americans who don't own stocks anyway, all they have to do is walk down the main street of their local town, and they will see for themselves just how bad things are. In fact, my wife and I were out running errands the other day, and this little shopping center that we go to, 2 more stores had closed and shut down.
Mm-hmm. Well, things are going to be bad because they're setting the market to run for about 2 years, possibly 3 years.
I don't think it'll hold together that long.
What you just said, they're putting in at $85 billion.
I don't think it can last that long because the more they pump that instant money into the market, the more the dollar itself is devalued, and that is simply building downward pressure in the international markets, which we're already seeing. Australia and China have dropped the dollar. They're trading directly from yuan to Australian dollar. 10 of the world's top 20 economies have dropped the dollar already. And this is why the United States is invading everybody they can think of under any excuse they can to force them back to using the dollar. They want to return the world to Bretton Woods, and the world is saying, no, it didn't work the last time. We're not going to go down that path again. Thank you very much.
Well, look, the United States is like number one, and it's going to be hard to take them down. I mean, they'll destroy these countries.
In what?
They'll do something.
What is the United States number one in, except the number of lawyers that we're producing?
Militarily and invading countries.
Well, we're certainly more aggressive about it.
And killing off their leaders so they can have whatever they want, their land, their resources, whatever. Experiment on their populations.
Well, remember, the United States is spending more money on the military than any other nation, but if you look at the quality of the weapons that are being created for all that money, they're not very good. We're not getting a good bang for our buck compared to nations like Russia and China, who are not spending anywhere near as much real wealth, but are producing reliable, durable, effective weapons systems. And so the reality is, for all the money that has been wasted on all of these boondoggle projects, the United States military may not be as capable as people like to believe it is. And remember, when Adolf Hitler started his campaign of conquest, he was viewed as completely unbeatable because he was going into weak, helpless nations and knocking them off one at a time, which is what the United States has been doing. But when Hitler finally confronted the other world powers, like the United States and Britain, he ran into a brick wall. And the same thing is going to happen when the United States finally escalates this war into a direct confrontation with China and potentially Russia. We're going to find out that all these very expensive weapons, like the F-22, which is still asphyxiating its pilots, the F-35, which even the Pentagon says can't win a dogfight against the equivalent Russian stealth jets, all of these weapon systems that are so expensive and they don't work, they're unreliable, are going to come back to haunt us. And I don't really think, because the United States lacks the 3 M's. They don't have the men, they don't have the manufacturing, and they don't have the money to win a conventional war. And that is why, if we allow this thing to escalate any further, somewhere between this moment and final capitulation by Washington, D.C., they will start turning those little brass keys in the missile silos. And it's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's the latest on those 2 Korean submarines that disappeared where they were like 10
Have not been found. Have not been found.
They haven't been found.
Missing, presumed destroyed.
Oh, God.
Okay.
All right, well, look, thank you very much. Great show.
You got it. Thanks
As
a lot.
usual.
We're going to switch over to Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, that guy probably had one of those cheap Saturday night special nights. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely.
Last Friday, I was
that blade longer than 2 3/4 inches? You're not allowed to take that.
I can't figure out how it got that out of hand.
Yeah, well, apparently he was only stopped when another student tackled him and drove him to the ground. So this guy was just running through the campus, just stab. And that, to me, sounds like the kind of behavior you get with these prescription antidepressants. And I want to find out this guy's name, and I want to find out if he was on these medications. We just now found, Adam Lanza was on these. We just now found out James Holmes, the Aurora shooter, was on a generic version of Zoloft, which is one of the medications the Columbine shooters were on. And so this stabbing, I feel bad for everybody who was injured. They're back up to saying it was 14. But we need to find out what medications this guy was on. And that will hammer home the fact it's not the guns, it's not the knives, it is these prescription antidepressants that has triggered this surge in completely crazy wacko violence.
Hey, last Friday I'm sitting out here in Fort Worth and I see 8 twin-rotor Marine choppers go from south to north. And then after probably, I'm thinking they might have landed at the Carswell Air Force Base here and maybe dump troopers out. And then they flew back from north to south.
Well, we have a lot of the
eight of them.
Okay, we got to take
information.
We got to take a break for commercials, but it's important to understand right now a lot of pilots are taking advantage of the war footing to get up on their training hours, and so a lot of what you're seeing overhead is just training. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a listener just wrote in to remind me that Cuba is one of the remaining few nations on Earth that have a state-controlled central bank, and they do not allow private central banks to control the money supply down there. So that is another reason why all of a sudden Cuba has been promoted to the official U.S. government strategic high-interest targets list. Corporate media is still going on about this stabbing over there in the campus. Ongoing tragedy. 14 injured, supposedly 2 suspects, 1 in custody, 1 still at large. And again, over at Columbine, 2 kids, both of them zoned out on antidepressants, got together and said, wouldn't it be fun to do this? And they were off and running on that whole situation. And obvious conclusion here, gun control isn't going to stop maniacs and mass killings, is it? And neither are armed campus guards, because the suspect who was arrested down there at this campus stabbing was tackled by another student. Now, earlier today, there was a significant earthquake very close to Iran's nuclear power station. No damage there reported, but 4 people killed, and causing a lot of problems over there. Some people were wondering if, in fact, there had been a nuclear strike on that power plant that was being disguised as an earthquake. But nuclear strikes don't produce that much energy. Your largest in-use nuclear bomb today would produce a ground shake equivalent to a magnitude 3 quake. And this was up there, magnitude 6, which is considerably larger. It's an exponential scale. Each higher number is 10 times. So to go from magnitude 3 to magnitude 6 is a 1,000-fold increase in energy released by the event here. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the economy. The plunge protection team has got the stock market back up there in the green, so all the investors who are living completely in denial are convinced everything is just hunky-dory. But if you were to adjust those stock market prices for inflation, and the decline in the value of the dollar from all this overprinting, you would see that the U.S. stock market has been in a gradual decline since 2000. And the decline is actually accelerating. The numbers may look impressive, but the actual worth of the stock market is sinking quite rapidly. Now, of course, last week everybody was talking about the surprising, at least to the U.S. government and the money junkies, drop in employment. They're still trying to claim that the unemployment numbers are very, very low, even though we all know that simply means more people have fallen off the end of the benefits, and they've stopped going to government employment agencies to try and find jobs. They're out there trying to do something else, but they're not being counted to keep these unemployment numbers low. The government is still out there saying, well, at least we had thus and such many jobs created. The big dark secret is, and this has been going on since 2008, most of the new job creation is in those minimum wage jobs. The high-paying manufacturing technology jobs have all fled to other countries. The United States workforce is being third-worldized. They talk about dropping the border with Mexico, and Mexicans are sneaking across the border to find better jobs here in the United States of America, and there aren't any, not even for the legal citizens. Right now, food service workers, which is a polite name for burger flippers, are at a record high in the U.S. economy. 7.6% of working Americans are now working in food service and drinking places, bars, that kind of thing. You can't run a nation on burger flippers and bartenders. None of these jobs are producing a product that can be exported to correct that hideous trade imbalance that is also putting further downward pressure on the dollar. Now, yesterday we were talking about how places like Bangkok, Thailand, and India, gold dealers were running out. They can't find new stock to sell. There's clearly a strong demand for physical gold in Asia. There is a gold shortage. Under the normal rules of supply and demand, we should be seeing gold prices going up. But they aren't. And this underscores the fact that the gold and silver prices are being artificially depressed. The paper gold brokerages are selling paper gold contracts as fast as they can, even though over in Europe, some of these gold contracts are coming due and are technically in a state of default, because there isn't deliverable physical gold to satisfy the contracts. And so these brokerages are trying to buy off the contract holders with stacks and stacks of freshly printed paper and ink thingies. And the banks are slashing their forecast for gold prices. Oh, they don't want you going to silver and gold. They want it all for themselves. They need you to keep your wealth in the banks and the stock market. And remember, we reported earlier, in fact last week, the British government is now starting to investigate if the London gold and silver fix is being manipulated the same way LIBOR was. I think that's a study in foregone conclusions, based on the fact that they're running out of physical gold in India, Thailand, Europe, and the price still stays down. Got to take a break for commercials. Back in a minute. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the very obvious disconnect from the fact that physical gold is in short supply. Banks in Europe are unable to fulfill their gold delivery contracts. They're trying to buy them out with freshly printed paper and ink thingies. Gold shortages are being reported by dealers in Thailand and India, and yet the gold prices stay down. Whatever happened to supply and demand? And we know that gold prices are being kept down because the price of physical gold and the price of those gold future delivery contracts are blended together. And simply by overselling these gold delivery contracts, they could keep the price down. And we're seeing the same thing now in silver. Dealers are reporting they're running out of the 2013 U.S. Silver Eagles. The United States Mint has run out of silver. They're starting to ration sales of the Silver Eagles. You only get so many. Remember, toward the end of last year, they had to stop issuing the 2012 Silver Eagles because they ran out of silver, and yet silver prices still stay down. Anybody who understands the normal market principle of supply and demand knows that when demand is high and there is a limited supply, prices are going to go up. Why aren't they? If it weren't for all this paper silver trading, silver would be above $100 an ounce right now. So yes, it's being manipulated. Of course, that can work to your favor, because if all of these money junkies are working as hard as they can to keep gold and silver prices down, now is the time for you to be getting into that, because they can't keep it up forever. Now that governments are starting to investigate gold and silver price rigging, they can't keep doing it for much longer. And again, over at republicbroadcasting.org, in fact, over at my website, there's a little banner ad for Republic Trading Group. And our prudent advice to everybody, especially in this post-Cyprus climate, is you should have no more money in the bank than you need to cover your obligations. Keep the rest under your own control. Bring it home, put it in the cookie jar, bury it in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation, whatever. And obviously, don't tell anybody you've done this. And if you are lucky enough to have a surplus of cash, now's the time to put some of that into silver and gold. Either the investment rounds and the investment bars, or if you want what's called the junk silver, the pre-1965 silver coinage issued by the United States of America. That coinage will still be worth something when the Federal Reserve collapses. All the later copper-clad coinage will be completely and utterly worthless, although it'll make good fodder for shotguns. All right, we got a caller on the line, Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, hello there, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good. Yeah, I was going to tell you, I've noticed in my web surfing here lately that all these riots and stuff all through Spain and stuff, they're not basically all, mainly caused from the banking thing, but it's because of the loss of money and the high prices of food that people are rioting. But the other thing is that in America here, with 47.8% of the population, I guess now on what I call war rations or food stamps, that's why we're not seeing the long soup lines out there along the roads and stuff, is because the government's hiding that. And if you research actual unemployment rate, it shows it's 22.7% right now.
I think it's a little higher than that.
Yeah, well, that's just it. See, and I don't think people realize what's going on. And then when you made that comment earlier about the employment there, yeah, there is some hiring there, but it's only because other employers are laying people off to keep them below 30 hours so they don't have to pay this Obama tax on this Obamacare.
That's exactly right. And, of course, Obamacare itself has triggered some hiring of people to come in and just fill out all that gratuitous government paperwork, but these are non-productive jobs that produce no saleable goods or services. It is simply the government legislating jobs out of thin air for people to sit in an office and shuffle the paper back and forth and feel like they're living actualized lives, which they aren't.
Right. Yeah, it's pathetic because I think what's coming here is we went through, I guess my folks, you could say, went through the Great Depression, but I think what we're going to see is a Great Depression.
I agree. We're already far beyond the Depression of the 1930s. Depression in the 1930s had a jobless rate of the American population roughly about 25%. We're already above that. Yeah,
and the 2013 food report shows that the actual food situation's in crisis. And here in America, with what corn they have and stuff, they're pumping I forget how many percentage of that into these biofuels and stuff.
30%.
And you have people that are starving to death everywhere like that, and I don't. And of course, the weather, which is another thing that gets me going on this this HARP thing. If they could control the weather.
Now wait a minute. HARP.
No, wait, Mike.
You listen to me. Listen, HARP controlling the weather is part of the government propaganda to make the alternative independent media look silly. All HARP is a medium wave phased array antenna. The goal of that was to try and see if they could bounce a radar signal off the ionosphere and image something meaningful over the horizon. And the government has put out all this stuff about HARP controlling weather so that the corporate media can point at the independent media and say, oh, those people believe there's a government weather-making machine. So we don't do HARP on this show. There are other shows that will gladly listen to that, but we absolutely... I'm former NASA. I'm a scientist. I know radio. I've built my own radios when I was a kid. I know that's what it is just by looking at the antenna array. So thank you very much. We're going to let you go and switch over to Jack in Massachusetts. Jack in Massachusetts, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. My goodness, I thought you'd been arrested by the gun grabbers or something. What's on your mind?
Do you think a good investment would be in Ginzo steak knives right now?
Well, I don't know. After that stabbing down in the Texas there, they're going to start banning those knives. Use a Ginsu knife, go to jail. Whatever. I'm really amazed they didn't ban those, the Yoshi blade, that very inexpensive ceramic knife. That thing goes right past metal detectors.
I wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
Since less than 1% of people have gold, what if the currency does collapse? Where are the people going to go? All they have their money is in fiat currency.
Well, when the Federal Reserve, I know a lot of people say go back to the gold standard. I know many of the states want to go back to the gold standard. They want a currency denominated in gold, which can work. I mean, you don't have to say that gold has to represent a certain valuation. You could have a paper note that represents an almost invisible amount of gold as long as that gold is backing it up. The reason I don't think a gold standard is a good idea in the long run is because of its limited fixed supply. Obviously, we don't even have enough gold to be handling gold transactions right now. For a currency to be based on a commodity, that commodity must first of all be universally recognized as valuable and exist or be able to be created in abundant enough supply to prevent hoarding and monopolization. Now, right now, these same private central bankers who trashed our economy and plunged us into debt, they're busy taking advantage of the artificial low prices to grab as much gold as they can. And so if we drop the Federal Reserve fiat currency and we go to a gold standard, we will be re-enslaved back to the same people who created this mess. And that is why I'm saying we need another commodity on which to base a monetary system. Whether, money has been based on rice, on salt, on special colored seashells, could be based on units of rice. I still think a kilowatt hour makes a good universal basis for a monetary unit and decentralizes the money creation, which is really what we need to think about. Because, again, if the banksters drop this fiat Federal Reserve note as a failed experiment and they have the majority of the gold, that hands the authority to create money right back to them and we start the same circus all over again.
The people that have 99% of the money in the fiat currency, are they just going to drown or what? Where will they go?
I imagine they're probably already, even as we speak, attempting to convert their wealth from U.S. dollar denomination into some other currency they think will survive the coming crash. And certainly they're buying gold and silver as fast as they can during these artificially lowered prices.
Very few.
Okay?
Yep, I understand.
All right.
Thank you.
You got it. We're going to switch over to Tom in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha to you, sir. So does this mean I can take off my tinfoil hat now since Hawk doesn't really do what they say it does?
Well, that all depends. Do you still have all your hair?
Oh, I got more hair than I know what to do with.
All right, then you can take the tinfoil hat off.
Okay.
All right.
A few things.
Yes.
I don't really think there's a shortage in silver. The reason the mints are having a problem is that their blanks are in short supply because they're really not equipped to produce the silver medallions, blanks, or whatever that they coin the dollars and what with the coins with. So I think that's what's causing a big backlog.
Well, that's not what I heard. That's not what I heard. I've heard those blank making machines are just sitting there idle.
Is that right?
Yeah. They can't get the raw silver to make the blanks.
Yeah, you know what? There's so much conflicting news out there, reports. You don't know what to believe. I've been buying silver since, I don't know, 1981. I've been buying it over the years, and recently I've been buying a lot of junk silver, the quarters, dimes, halves, whatever. And I've been trying to find more, and they're just not out there. And, I've tried to talk to some of my friends. I said, look, you got an IRA. You're going to lose it. Take it out, put it into a gold or silver IRA or something. And you know what? They just look at you cross-eyed. These are people that would trust you for just about anything else. And when you tell them that their future savings is in jeopardy, they just kind of gloss over. They glaze, their eyes go glazy, and they don't know what you're talking about.
Well, there are a lot, you need to understand, for people who still have some of their wealth intact, they believe in the system because so far the system continues to work for them. But the rot and the predatory behavior of the system as a whole began at the very bottom level with the struggling workers, but now it is moving upward. It's very firmly into the middle class, and next are going to be the upper middle class. That's what Cyprus portends. They're only going after the savings accounts that are over the maximum insurance limit, because if they take savings accounts that are fully insured, they have to turn around and put the money right back. And so now the upper middle class is going to realize what's going on. When they start, Obama was talking yesterday about mandatory caps on the IRAs and 401ks, and if you have money you want to save for your retirement above that cap, you are going to have to buy Treasury bonds. So sooner or later, you know, it is going to break through on the people, and I have lost count of the number of people that I was warning about a downturn in the economy back in the 1990s, you know, who just thought I was completely out of mind, and now I get emails from them all the time saying, boy, were you right, and we should have listened. And I reply back, yeah, you should have. And, you know, sooner or later, reality is going to catch up with all these people. The advantage of the junk silver is that it is universally recognized and assumed to have a fixed value, and as a means of barter and commerce, while we're trying to set up the new America, I think it's going to come very in handy. You're not going to have to worry about carrying around large blocks of silver and gold and you know, cutting off weighed chunks with a wire cutter. People are just going to say, you know, how much is this gallon of gas? Oh, give me 25 cents in silver. Okay, there you are. There's a George Washington for you. And that's how commerce is going to work. Nobody's going to be bothering about trying to figure out how much silver is in those coins. They know it's a fixed amount. They're just going to start using the face value of those coins. And they'll know that it still has worth. The silver coins issued by ancient Rome still have inherent worth today. And that's exactly what's going to happen with those pre-65 quarters and dimes.
I'm trying to tell people that I know that, you know, they're saying, like, we can't can't use gold and stuff, we'll have to carry this huge bag. I said, no, you won't, because you only need a dime for a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk and maybe 20 cents or, like you said, a quarter for a gallon of gas.
Mm-hmm.
But they just can't comprehend it. I like your idea about the coming up with that, you know, the electricity thing.
Yes.
But I almost feel that no matter what we try to do to stabilize everything and to keep it honest, these criminals that are in charge of things will find a way. Because look what Obama's done to the coal industry. They've shut down all the coal plants. Now they've caused electricity rates to go up, and as he said, they're just naturally going to skyrocket. So how would that work in? I think you've got a good idea. We've got to find something to base our value on, but I just don't know if there's anything that these people can't manipulate.
Well, that is a sad reality. I mean, the men who created the United States of America, following kicking out the last government, they tried to make a government that was self-correcting, where no one person had too much power, because they understood politics is going to attract the kind of people who should never be allowed in politics. And there really is no way to change that. The Founding Fathers understood there were going to be immediate corrupting influences. They understood that the banking families of Europe were going to try and get a private bank into the United States as fast as they could, principally through their agent Alexander Hamilton. And they tried to create a system where nobody was going to have enough power to seriously change the course of the nation. Of course, those corrupting influences do work, and they work slowly and over time, and that's why the United States is not the country that it used to be. And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to try and set up a government that is self-limiting, self-correcting. The power is reserved to the people. But again, the corruptors are going to be at work trying to destroy it. And I'm reminded very much of what Ben Franklin said, that coming out of the Continental Congress, when they had first put together the new nation. And somebody asked, what have you created? And he says, we've created a republic if you can keep it. So even back then, they understood that as soon as the ink was dry on the new United States of America, the money junkies were going to be coming back in and try and buy and bribe or coerce or blackmail their way back to control of the nation's wealth and its people. And that's just a reality, and we have to design against that in the new America. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phone. Sparky in Ohio. Aloha, Sparky. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. You're talking about your electro. What would happen if the price of electricity went down?
What do you mean the price of electricity? If electricity is the money, the price is an absolute fixed standard.
Somebody comes up with a way to make electricity that cuts the cost per kilowatt hour in half.
Well, just like somebody who finds up a more cost-effective way to mine gold didn't change the value of the money when we were on the gold standard. And the more
supply increases, so demand would go down.
Yeah, but if the supply is increasing in the size of the population, Basically, again, if the electricity is the value of the money, then there's a more abundant money supply. And frankly, I see that as a plus for the electro, because it means instead of having one institution creating the money, people with solar panels or windmills on their property are creating their own wealth. There obviously has to be a clearinghouse for the tokenization of the electro. There's going to be an electro coin or an electro paper note. But it's denominated in those kilowatt hours. So people can literally be creating wealth on their own property. And as you correctly point out, this is going to stimulate more efficient means of generating electricity, transmitting electricity, storing electricity. We're going to see battery technology really take off. And I see these as all good things, and they're all empowering to the people. It can't be monopolized by a single giant private federal battery.
But if more electricity is provided by all these different services, then the value of the dollar, the electro, would go down.
Let me go back to the silver certificate. The fact that people were discovering new silver mines and mining more silver did not diminish the value of the silver dollar, because that volume of silver was the dollar. The increasing abundance of silver meant the money supply was enlarging, which is a good thing, because you need the money supply to enlarge as the population grows.
The greenback.
Okay, could you repeat that last part?
What backed the greenback, or the Reichmark, or the money they printed on the Isle of Man? You told that story one time.
Yes, we did, and we talked about how Lincoln basically used the greenback to avoid having to borrow money from private bankers. And it wasn't a perfect system, but it certainly worked better than the banknotes issued by the private bankers.
The way, Michael, I look back on it, when Schwarzenegger was handing out IOUs,
yes,
if California had accepted those IOUs as tax payments, that would have been a new, fair fiat system right there.
Well,
I mean, the greenback, the Reichsmark, the Isle of Man dollar was a fiat currency, not backed by the services provided by the teacher who got the pink slip in California.
I think you're wandering off your original topic here, but I want to make a simple point here. When the government is issuing the currency, then the currency is a public utility intending to serve the public. When bankers issue the currency, it is a for-profit operation serving the bankers. That's the key core difference we need to keep in mind. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a couple more phone calls. Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Tate, are you there? Oh, there you are.
I am. Yep, cool. I love the monetary talk. I really appreciate it. One thing we don't talk too much about on this show is the Britannic Free Trade Agreement model that is going into all these nations and wiping out the wealth of the indigenous peoples and consolidating it into corporate structures in London and Wall Street. And now we're seeing arbitrage where all the wealth is now consolidating into a few oligarchs' hands. Mm-hmm. And in this new world that we always talk about, would you get rid of free trade agreements and use tariffs like we built the nation on?
That is a very, very complicated issue, and I don't think there's a good general answer for it. I think if we simply start the new nation with an absolute ban on private central banking and understand that it is the function of the government to provide the public currency as a public utility and not allow the bankers to be in charge of the money supply, which makes about as much sense as letting drug addicts be in charge of our pharmacies, I think a lot of these other problems that we've seen will automatically go away. Certainly with the idea of going back to a currency based on a commodity and to return to the wisdom of the Coinage Act of 1792, where debasement of the currency is a death penalty offense. A lot of these issues where these instantly created fractional reserve currencies, these debt-based currencies, are used to acquire the real wealth of the people of the world, that's not simply going to be possible. It's going to be designed out at the very foundation of the new economy. And this is why these bankers fight so hard to keep these systems in place. They'll assassinate presidents to keep the scam going. They'll start world wars to keep the scam going. They're trying to start one now because they understand it's a scam and it doesn't benefit the people of the world. And like I said, the one good point of globalism right now is we could see all of these private central banks come crashing down at the same time. And if we do, when we do, we need to be prepared as a human civilization to wipe the slate clean and say, okay, failed experiment, rule by compound interest is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. We have to go back to where the government's function is to take care of the nation. Currency has to be a public utility, not a for-profit private venture. And we need to absolutely make that as the founding bedrock of our new economy. And simply say, period, end of discussion. You, the government, will not sell us back into the slavery of the bankers, like they've already done 3 times in this country. And we just have to make it right in that new organic founding document. No private central bankers will be allowed control of the money supply. And I think our nation's biggest mistake back in 1913, when the U.S. Congress bypassed the Constitution and allowed the creation of the Federal Reserve without the necessary constitutional amendment, that's when the American people should have stormed Capitol Hill and given them all a good coating of tar and feathers. But we failed to do it, and this is the result.
We both know that they took out Abraham Lincoln, they took out John F. Kennedy.
They tried to take out Andrew Jackson.
I believe they took out McKinley, and they even tried taking out Roosevelt. A lot of those guys really did not like the financiers deciding what was best for this nation.
Yeah, well, when they did Roosevelt, they were going to do it with a fascist coup d'etat because they didn't want to just take out Roosevelt. They wanted to take out the constitutional form of government in this nation and bring about a fascist model modeled on that of Mussolini in Italy at the time. And that's why you have those little emblems on the front of the House of Representatives, that bunch of sticks with the axe head. That is a Roman symbol for fascist rule. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We've got a caller on the line, Chris in Utah. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. May I suggest confiscating the gold and silver from anyone who has obtained it fraudulently, which is mostly the big banks. Then go on a silver and gold-backed currency.
That could definitely work. I mean, if you're looking at the model of currency as a public utility, then and citing as the precedent when Roosevelt did take the gold away from the American people to prop up the banks, I think the case could be made that the non-jewelry gold in the nation is collectively the property of the people and should become, if people really want a gold standard, that would definitely be a good way to go. That the private ownership of gold bullion and gold coin be rendered illegal for all those big banks who've grabbed it all up, people like George Soros, and say it goes back in Fort Knox, it is the foundation for our national currency. You need to remember, back when the gold and silver standards were in place, most of the gold was owned by the U.S. government as backing for its issued currency. And when the government started letting the banks issue the currency, there wasn't a reason to hang on the gold, and they started letting it go. They pledged it as collateral on the national debt. It was kept as a backing for the dollar for international trade, although not domestic, until Nixon ended gold convertibility in 1971. And that's when things really began to get out of control. But yeah, if people insist on a gold or silver-based national currency, I think nationalizing the gold and silver supply is the only way to prevent the money junkies from immediately regaining control of the economy.
Quite. Keep your powder dry.
Absolutely, absolutely. All righty, I think that was our last caller, so we're going to move on to some other stories here. And I do want to make a comment in light of all those people calling in and saying, well, if you go back to a silver or gold currency, and what happens if all of a sudden there's more gold and silver? And again, go back and look at history. The United States silver dollar was the dollar. The word dollar goes all the way back in history to Thaler in Germany, which had silver mines that would sell their silver in coins of a uniform size and weight. And because they were so uniform, they became a standard means of exchange. The fact that the taller mines were continuing to produce more and more silver did not in any way alter the value of the coins, because the silver in the coin was the value. And you need to free yourself from thinking about gold and silver or even barter in terms of we have to equate it to the U.S. dollar and then go back. That's what the U.S. government has forced on the rest of the world with Bretton Woods. You cannot conduct any exchange without first going through the U.S. dollar. And so when people ask, what are these rounds going to be, the junk silver going to be worth when the Federal Reserve collapses? How do we calculate it? You don't calculate it at all. That silver coin is the money. You don't need to convert it to whatever the Federal Reserve says the dollar is. The United States dollar is the physical silver. 371.25 grains of silver was the dollar when this country was started. Now, there's actually additional metal in the coins for durability, but that 371.25 grains of silver was the dollar when this nation started. And the gold dollar was simply that amount of gold that would equal the same value, which was, 24.75 grains, 1/15 the weight. And that was the currency. And if there was all of a sudden more silver and more gold that was coming into circulation, it did not change the value of the silver and gold coinage. And those paper notes that were being issued were not money. They were claim checks that you could at any time take to a bank and exchange for the physical silver and gold. That was the way the gold and silver standard worked. And it worked at a time when money was being treated, currency was being treated as a public utility to serve the public, to support commerce. And when the private central bankers come in, money and currency is converted to a for-profit venture. Same thing when we see the privatization of highways, privatization of the utilities, privatization of anything. It ceases being a public service and becomes just another product for sale to reap huge, huge profits. And that was what happened when you had the money junkies coming in. So let me back up here. When the Federal Reserve collapses, and more people are saying it is imminent, those pre-1965 silver coins are going to be an automatic shoo-in to be a transitional currency while we set up the new America. And people will not be thinking in terms of what's this quarter worth in terms of the Federal Reserve dollars. When the Federal Reserve crashes, the Federal Reserve dollar is going to be worth about the same thing that they have down in Zimbabwe, paper notes for $100 trillion. So it's going to be pointless to try and think of those terms. You will think in terms of that face value. How much is a gallon of gas? 25 cents in pre-1965 quarters. How much is a loaf of bread? Silver dime. And everybody will just automatically fall into that. That will be the unit of currency. And you need to understand one more thing. When the currency, when the coinage had the value in it, there was nothing the bankers or government could do that could change that value. It was under your control. When you had that coin in your hand, you were master of it. When the Federal Reserve came along and the silver standard was done away with and the currency began to float, that control over the worth of your money left your hands and went to the government and the bankers. And they can devalue it at will, and they have. They have. The dollar today, as managed by the Federal Reserve, is worth a tiny, tiny fraction of what this silver dollar was worth. We have seen back in the 1990s, they just automatically devalued the dollar to change the balance of trade, triggered the Japanese real estate buying frenzy. Americans who had worked for a certain amount of money, traded their labor for it, woke up the next morning and all of a sudden discovered everything that they wanted to buy that was imported from Japan was now twice as expensive. And in a very real sense, the government and the banks declared to working America, we're sorry, your labor is only worth half of what it was yesterday. That was a slap in the face of everybody who went to school to learn a profession, who was working and trying to build the American dream, and all of a sudden the money junkies in the government said, sorry, you're only worth half as much today. We've decided we need to do that to make ourselves more money. when the coinage is the money, the silver is in there, or it is linked to a commodity of a fixed known value like electricity or rice or sugar or gasoline, the bankers and the government cannot change that value. And we cannot allow the new America to give the government and the bankers that power to arbitrarily steal wealth from the people. That's what Ben Bernanke does. Anytime that he needs more quantitative easing to save Wall Street from their Ponzi scheme collapse, and he runs up that printing press or he just types a whole bunch of zeros into that computer, he is stealing real wealth from your pocket. That's why I call him Lord Ben Voldemort. He waves that evil wand over at the Federal Reserve, and wealth that you worked for, put in your pocket, put in your savings account, vanishes and turns up in the pockets of the Wall Street money junkies. And now they're not even doing it through subterfuge. They're just going to go in, do direct. We need to grab your savings account. We're sorry. We tried our best. We need your savings account. They did it in Cyprus. Probably going to do it in Luxembourg. It's already written into the plan for the Canadian budget. It's just a grab for money. And they're going to keep on doing it as long as they think that, hey, you don't see what they're doing. They really think you are that stupid that you do not understand what private central banking has done to every single nation enslaved to those private central banks. I put out a challenge a couple of weeks ago. You show me one nation with a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest that is not drowning in debt. Nobody has identified one. They don't exist. They can't. It is by design. It is rule by compound interest. And it is no more legitimate than rule by divine right or rule by chattel ownership of your person, rule by slavery. It is time for the human civilization to evolve beyond this scam. It is a scam. It's a fraud, just like rule by divine right or just by rule by slavery. It only works because the people are brainwashed into believing this is the way life is supposed to be. We're supposed to do what this guy with the crown says on his head because the imaginary playmate in the sky told me to, or at least told the priests who told me that's what's going on. Or rule by slavery. It only works if people are brainwashed to believe it's possible for one person to physically own another. And our current scam only works if people believe that they owe this money to the private central bank that has never even existed in the first place. Scott in Arizona, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Just talking about the silver. If that ever came about, we'd have to have unlimited coinage of silver like it used to be. And I just saw for an ounce of silver you can get almost 8 gallons of gas, so a quarter would be kind of high for gas.
Well, I'm just throwing out these numbers arbitrarily. We don't know what's going to happen. But, you could have a silver and gold-based coinage where the silver content, isn't the entire coin. I mean, they started doing that when, after 1965, the Kennedy halves still had silver, but in a much smaller supply. The Eisenhower dollars originally had a small silver content. You could have coins that are convenient to hold in your hand that have just a tiny fraction of silver and gold, but that silver and gold is the money. Got to take a break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I want to finish up on the economy because I want to get on to this very obvious attempt to try and gin up a war with North Korea and somehow make it look like it's North Korea's fault. Now, remember, last week they were going on and the U.S. was saber-rattling and screaming, we've got to do something about it. And the public opinion polls came back very firmly showing that the public perception is it's the U.S. trying to get this thing going. So now the U.S. is backing off the rhetoric, and they're trying to find some other way where they can attack North Korea and make it look like it's their fault. They made us invade them, Mommy. I really didn't want to do it. Of course they want to do it. It's the stepping stone to war with China. And the real goal for the war with China is to isolate China politically and economically, most important the latter one, so that gold-backed yuan is no longer a threat to the U.S. dollar internationally. Because the United States is bankrupt in a very real sense. And the only thing propping up international demand for the dollar is its linkage to oil purchases in the Middle East. And let me sort of back up and give you the overview for those of you who are new to the show. Give you that overview. The United States price to come into World War II and save Great Britain from the mess they were in. If you go back and you read Winston Churchill, they wanted war with Germany because Germany at the time was operating without a private central bank, and that made them an economic power that could not be competed with. And so the war was going, and Germany was doing, to be brutally frank, very well. And the United States was willing to come into the war on Great Britain's side, but only at a price. And that price was that Great Britain would allow the pound to step down from being the global trade and reserve currency and allow the dollar to take over. That was the deal Roosevelt made with Churchill. And so after World War II, all of the world's major economic powers gathered at this luxury resort in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, and they hammered out the Bretton Woods Agreement that made the dollar the global trade and reserve currency. And all of the nations of the world signed the agreement on two conditions. The first condition was that the United States would refrain from overprinting those paper and ink dollars, as a means to simply loot the world of real products, real produce. And the second condition was the U.S. dollar would always be convertible back to gold at $35 an ounce. That's why gold was priced at $35 an ounce for so long. That was the value of the dollar internationally. Well, of course, the Federal Reserve, because they are not really a part of the United States government, did not feel constrained by Bretton Woods, and they did start overprinting. And a large part of the boom times of the 1950s, along with the fact that we were the only nation that still had an intact manufacturing base, was this overprinting of dollars, which were sent to other countries to buy raw materials and produce, and these other countries, because of Bretton Woods, had to accept it at full face value. So you get into the 1970s, and all of a sudden France is looking at their vaults, and they've got these huge, huge stacks of ink and paper thingies from the Federal Reserve. And so they announced their intention to exercise their option to convert them back to gold at $35 an ounce. And Richard Nixon took a look in Fort Knox and realized they didn't have enough gold to do it. And so Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility, supposedly temporarily, but of course it became permanent. And that was functionally the end of the convertibility clause of Bretton Woods. And this started to depress the value of the dollar internationally because it was no longer backed by gold. So the first thing Richard Nixon did is, in order to allow the U.S. government to go on borrowing money internationally, he created the Environmental Protection Agency. And what the EPA did, under the guise of saving the world, is they started grabbing large tracts of publicly owned land and locking them away, including their mineral resources, to pledge as collateral against U.S. government borrowing. By the way, that is not in the Constitution. The federal government having that right to pledge your public lands as collateral on government borrowing. They did it anyway. And they sold the American people that all of this land grabbing going on, and cumulatively, it's about one-third the nation right now. And it was done under all these little tiny programs, heritage rivers and roadless zones and wilderness preserves and wetlands and all the rest of these programs to break it up into little chunks so that people didn't see the totality of the land grab that was going on. And it was all sold to the American people. Oh, we're doing this for the future. It's for the children, for future generations, to preserve nature. And it wasn't. It was all collateralization on U.S. government borrowing. And at the same time this was going on, the United States government approached all of the world's oil-producing nations. And they said, we will make you a deal. This was in the Mideast. This was OPEC. And they said, we'll make you a deal. If you agree to sell your oil only for U.S. dollars, we will militarily protect you from Israel. And so these Arab oil nations said, okay, we will sell our oil only for dollars. And other nations had to come to the United States and trade real agricultural produce or real products in exchange for these little ink and paper things to go buy the oil they needed from the Middle East. That's the petrodollar. More about that when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about the history of the petrodollar. The United States goes to all of the Mideast oil-producing nations And it says, we will make you a deal. As long as you agree to sell your oil only for U.S. dollars, we will militarily protect you from Israel. And so other nations around the world would have to first send agricultural produce or manufactured goods to the United States to get these little ink and paper tickets with which they would then go down to the Middle East and buy the oil they needed for their own nations. So the United States was basically taking a piece of the action of the Arab oil revenues. And the Arab oil nations, of course, built up this huge surplus of these ink and paper tickets with which they started investing back in the United States of America. Which everybody points to and says, oh, those Arab oil sheiks, they're sending all this money to America to buy us. Well, it's by design of the U.S. government that this came about. Now, of course, we have this situation where Israel is no longer, since 9/11, listening to anything the United States has to say about who to attack and not to attack. And because of Israel's aggressions to their neighboring nations, these oil-producing nations are starting to say, hey, the petrodollar deal is dead, obviously. And it began in 2002 up in Iraq, which was already very unhappy with the United States government anyway. So Saddam Hussein went to the United Nations, and he got United Nations permission to sell Iraq's oil for the euro, which was already looking far more attractive than the U.S. dollar. Horror of horrors, that can't be allowed to stand. They have weapons of mass destruction, and they invade Iraq, and they lynch Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil is back on the market, but only for United States dollars. Then you had Libya. A couple of years ago, Gaddafi was everybody's friend. He was a reformed terrorist. He was recognizing Israel's right to exist. He was building this amazing infrastructure projects in Libya to green it up, and the Libyan standard of living was just skyrocketing. And then all of a sudden, Gaddafi announces a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and announced that Libya's oil would be for sale for the gold dinar. And the rest of Africa said, wow, we want to get in on this gold dinar thing because it's looking certainly a lot more trustworthy than the U.S. dollar. So the U.S. invades Libya, and they kill Gaddafi. And they destroy the gold dinar, the state bank. They put in a brand new private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And that is the real agenda for all these wars, to force the entire world back to Bretton Woods, using the U.S. Federal Reserve dollar as the de facto global trade and reserve currency, so the U.S. financial system can harvest off a piece of the action of all transactions. And any nation that dares to have a state central bank goes on the U.S. government's special high interest or strategic high interest targets list. I'll let you think about that one for a while. That's why they want to go into Iran. Iran has a central bank that is owned by the government, not by private bankers. Same thing with Cuba. Russia just took control of their central bank to turn the public currency back into a public utility to serve the people and the nation, not the private bankers. And that's why war with Russia is now inevitable, because this dollarification process doesn't work unless they get everybody. That's why they're talking about going into Venezuela. They're trying to steal the election for a pro-Federal Reserve, pro-U.S. candidate. And already the interim president, who's been running the place since Hugo Chavez passed away, is already saying there's obvious outside money pouring into the nation. They have caught people who were hired to cause acts of violence ahead of the elections this weekend. This clash of civilizations they keep talking about is a war between banking systems. And, of course, the bankers aren't going to fight their own wars. They never have. That's what your children are for. They're just the chips in the great game to force private central banking, the same banking system we fought a revolution to be free of, the same banking system that has destroyed this nation now 3 times in a row, the same style of banking that has plunged Europe into hopelessly unpayable debt. That is the same style of banking being forced on the rest of the world at the point of American bayonets. The New World Order is a global fascist dictatorship centered on a global version of the Federal Reserve that issues all of the global currency as a loan of interest in order to permanently enslave the human population forever. That's what the New World Order is, and why you should be opposing it with every breath of your body. Going to go to the phones here. Aaron in Texas. Aloha, Aaron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Aaron, are you there?
He dropped.
He dropped. Well, gosh darn on him. All righty. Let's see. We talked about the petrodollar. Apparently, European Union antitrust regulators are now investigating MasterCard card fees. They may have violated antitrust rules going across borders there. I'm going to skip on down here to the Korea situation because it's getting ugly over there. Week ago, of course, it was the United States sending warships off the coast, B-2 overflights, B-52 flights, missile batteries, just rattling the sabers as hard as they could. And the public polls came back where the public viewed this as another American aggression, ginned up out of thin air. So what if North Korea has a nuclear weapon? North Korea is not going to attack the United States with a single nuclear weapon because they know an instant annihilation would be the response. The reason the United States doesn't want North Korea to have a nuclear weapon is because it makes a great weapon of defense. If the United States is invading across that demilitarized zone, that's where North Korea will use their nuclear weapons. That's the reason to have nuclear weapons. That's the reason we were all told the United States had to build the world's largest nuclear arsenal to deter other nations from invading us. And of course, now we're being told that North Korea and Iran are going to attack us, which means they lied to us about the deterrent value. But that's the whole point of having a nuclear weapon, not to go out and attack somebody in a case of national suicide, but to discourage others from attacking you. And let's be honest, there's two things you need to keep in mind. One, the only nation on Earth to ever actually use nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country is the United States. And second, have you noticed in all these wars that we have been suffering through for the last 10 years where the U.S. is screaming nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons, the United States is only attacking countries that turn out not to have them. So we're seeing this situation where we're getting this story, and this is coming out of From the Trenches World Report. Top U.S. military commander in the Pacific said North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons and long-range ballistic missiles represent a clear and direct threat to the United States and its allies in the region. How about the United States nuclear arsenal and the United States ballistic missiles? Are they not a direct threat to the rest of the world, given that the United States is the only nation whose government was psychotic enough to actually use them? So, anyway, North Korea has issued a warning to foreigners to leave South Korea because of the potential of outbreak of war. Now, tomorrow they are going to test fire. I hit that word test. They're going to test fire 2 medium-range missiles which will pass over Japan and splash down somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. And they've gone through all the formal paperwork. They have said, this is where we are launching from. This is where they are going. This is where they will land. Please do not have anything important sitting in that part of the ocean, which is what all nations are expected to do when they're testing their military hardware. Japan's prime minister has issued a statement that Japan will attempt to shoot down North Korea's test missiles. That is a violation of all kinds of international treaties, and it's an attempt to escalate this into a new war. And remember, nobody cares about North Korea in Washington, D.C. North Korea was originally on the list of troubled nations in order to make it look like we weren't just whooping on all of Israel's designated enemies. We were going after Iraq and Iran and Syria and the rest of it. And people said, we're just obeying Israel's orders on who to attack. And they said, oh, no, we're also looking at North Korea. But nobody actually did anything about North Korea until China started talking about the gold yuan as a replacement for the dollar in international trade. And now they've come to that agreement with Australia, and Russia and China are trading directly without going through the U.S. dollar, and that's what makes China a threat to the money junkies. So now they need a war with China, and they can't just haul off and attack China. And China certainly isn't going to haul off and attack the United States of America. They need a back door. And just like Roosevelt had to go through Japan to actually get his war with Nazi Germany, the United States is going to go through North Korea. That's the plan. They're trying to basically just come up with this out of thin air. All right, a couple of phone calls. The Happy Heretic over in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. Is it snowing where you are?
It is a little bit, but it's stopped for the moment.
Okay. This is April, isn't it? Yes.
I know. Springtime, it was here for a few minutes, and then it's taken a breather, I guess. I just called to concur with you about, what they say the clash of civilizations really is about banking systems. And my heart really goes out to the people who've been duped by this whole thing, and it's joined at the hip with a sense of patriotism. And the people that I've met, there's so many people who believe this, that they always say, and they're over there fighting for your freedom. Mm-hmm. And to them I say, well, if that were true, the more they fight, the freer we get.
That's a good point to make there, and just trap them in the logic. But again, for Americans who are dependent on the federal government for a check, whether it's a salary or some kind of food assistance program or unemployment or whatever, they will not allow themselves to see the federal government as bad. It's just like when you have a child with abusive parents, they don't dare see their parents as being the problem because of their dependency. And abused children very often grow up thinking it was all their fault, that somehow they were bad. There was something about them where they somehow deserved this abuse. And we have a huge segment of the American population who have fallen into that psychological trap. And it's time for Americans to grow up and realize, yeah, our parents are abusive. They're psychotic. They're sociopathic. And they do not care for or love the American people. They see us as little more than walking wallets and soldier breeders. And again, our schools propagandized into believing this whole thing, that idea that the Federal Reserve was part of the federal government, and it isn't. It's just a name. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express, but we were taught to believe that this was the way it was supposed to be, and that if you somehow challenged this system of banking, that it somehow made you un-American, or worse, it made you a communist.
Well, you and I are here to shatter myths, and unfortunately it feels like my role in life is to teach people things that they don't want to learn.
Well, it's a very tricky thing to do, and one of the skills when you're involved in this kind of work is you have to develop an instinct for what the people you are talking to are ready to listen to. And don't cross that line or you will lose them. And what you do is you start with something that everybody knows now was a fraud, Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, and you lead them forward from that into, well, how can you assume they're telling you the truth about the monetary system when, in point of fact, you already acknowledged they lied to you about the weapons of mass destruction? And you basically, and it's a very gentle process. You're not going to convince people overnight, especially those who are dependent on those government paychecks. Or they absolutely will not want to see themselves as being part of a machine that is evil. And again, in post-World War II Germany, you still had all these old burned-out Nazi government officials running around saying, "No, we were good. We didn't do anything bad." Because the way a tyrant will enslave his population psychologically is to get them to cross more and more lines of moral compromise, to reach a point where they're trapped in terms of supporting the government. The torture was the line here in the United States of America. When it became out that the U.S. government was torturing prisoners of war at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, and a lot of people said, I can't go past that line, but many did. They bought into this thing, oh, it's necessary. They saw 24 on TV, and yes, there are circumstances where it's right and just, and once they step over that line, they become trapped. They can't look in a mirror any longer. They can't.
That's why they need to take away strip Obama of his Nobel Peace Prize and give it to Bradley Manning.
I would agree with you, but I don't think it'll have that effect. The problem is, once people made that moral choice to cross that line into torture and war crimes, it's okay for us to do it, bad for them to do it, Now they have to go on believing the ruler is right, because the instant they admit the ruler was wrong, then they have to admit to themselves they were wrong to have supported him. And most people don't have the moral courage to do that. And that is how dictators entrap their populations.
Sad but true. It's amazing. Well, the little boy that pointed with his finger and said, "The emperor's naked," he was just naive enough just to blurt it out with enthusiasm, like uncontrolled enthusiasm. It wasn't exactly courage. It was just so damn obvious. Why isn't it obvious to other people?
Well, because little children are a little less trapped and brainwashed. That's why they try and get the kids younger and younger. Little tiny kids, as soon as they're able to talk and understand words, get them into Sunday school, get them brainwashed into thinking about the imaginary playmate in the sky, get them into social studies about why we're great and the communists were bad, and so forth. And now we're seeing our public schools starting to teach that the founding fathers of this nation were really terrorists and we shouldn't want to emulate them. We have a story we're going to talk about the gun grabbers. The schools in Connecticut have already started teaching their classes that the Second Amendment is a collective right for the states and not the individuals, even though the United States Supreme Court has ruled exactly the opposite. Those state-controlled schools are the brainwashing facilities. Everybody says, why aren't our schools educating? That's not their job. Their job is indoctrination. And that's why we're falling so far behind other countries in our math and science scores. Nobody wants young kids growing up knowing how to think analytically and critically, because critical thinkers are impossible to bamboozle by the corporate media. And it's just another way where our government, in its own self-interest, is destroying the future of this nation.
Yeah, it's true. Hey, just one more little thing. I used to live in Korea, South Korea, and I just sure hope that nothing... I hope they don't.
I agree with you, but again, they are so far along this dollarification agenda, they have to go all the way. The U.S. government is too far past the point of being able to say, we've changed our mind, we're going to turn around and go back. They're past the point of no return, and that is why things are so dangerous. We'll be right back.
I sure hope you're wrong, brother.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go to Mark in Louisiana. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, good afternoon. I would like to know if you can explain it, because I've asked a lot of people, and I'm talking about not just run-of-the-mill professionals, people who are supposed to know stuff, about what exactly is a credit default swap. I know it's supposed to be a scam, but I don't really know how it works.
Okay, it's not in and of itself a scam. It is a legitimate financial instrument that has been distorted for nefarious purposes. Now, a credit default swap is basically an insurance policy. If I invest 10 million electros in your business and I'm expecting a return, I can go to somebody who sells credit default swaps and I can buy a credit default swap so that if I lose my investment to you because you go out of business, the credit default swap will pay me back at least a significant part of my investment to you. In fact, if I buy enough of these credit default swaps, I could get my entire investment back. It was created as a means to mitigate losses, and so it really functions like an insurance policy. But there are a couple of differences. In the regular world, for example, I can buy fire insurance on my own home because I own that asset. But I cannot buy fire insurance on my neighbor's home because I don't own that asset. And in regular insurance, companies that sell insurance policies are required by law to keep adequate cash reserves on hand to pay the claims that will inevitably come in. The credit default swaps are completely unregulated, and you can buy credit default swaps on debt obligations you don't own. And that is where the problem really comes in. We have had, for example, there was a huge scandal a while back where Goldman Sachs was being paid by the state of California to sell California bonds, and at the same time, Goldman Sachs was selling credit default swaps against those bonds to their clients. They were literally betting it wasn't going to work out. And Wall Street has sold an estimated $90 trillion with a T dollars worth of credit default swaps against the Eurozone debt. And because credit default swaps are unregulated, they don't have the cash reserves to make good on the claims that come in. That's what happened to AIG. Back when the mortgage-backed security fraud was ramping up and everybody was buying these mortgage-backed securities, AIG was selling credit default swaps on those mortgage bundles. Then the fraud was exposed, the mortgage-backed security bubble imploded, and AIG didn't have the cash to make good on the claims, and they collapsed. And
so what you're saying is that AIG was kind of the insurance company, and it took the premiums, but it didn't make sure that it had the cash to pay.
That's exactly right. And also, AIG was selling these credit default swaps on these mortgage bundles to people who did not actually own those mortgage bundles. It's just another form of gambling. You're betting on the outcome of a fight in the ring. You don't own either fighter. You're just betting on the outcome, and that's what these credit default swaps were being used for. And it's not what they were originally designed to do. It was supposed to be loss mitigation, but it's just another instrument that they could use to just play the market, play the game, play the gambling, and make a lot of money. And with the derivatives, when you win big. When you lose big. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media has finally exhausted this tragic stabbing down at this college in Texas, and they're back to the gun grab. And Obama's out there, and he's got all these people from Newtown, and he's out there, just made a statement. It's not about me, it's for the children. And it's a very revealing statement, because he's trying to de-link himself and his political fortunes from the gun grab. And that tells us the internal polls are still not supporting this agenda. And that's probably a very good thing. Now, an interesting story just came out over at Ammo Land. And the headline is, New York gun confiscation underway. Citizens told to turn in pistol owner ID and firearms. And I want to read you a paragraph from this. Those folks having their weapons and FID cards confiscated have been discovered to have been prescribed multiple different types of psychotropic drugs, such as those for depression or anxiety. In other words, the gun grabbers know. They know these medications are triggering episodes of violence. But the agenda is to get the guns. We'll let them go on taking these medications and committing acts of violence with things other than guns, like this stabbing down on this campus. They're now saying this guy was just running through the halls, randomly stabbing people. And if you go over to SSRIstories.com, you will see incidents of these medications triggering acts of violence that did not involve guns. They involved hammers, knives, cars, sledgehammers, samurai swords, kitchen utensils. Whatever is at hand will be grabbed by these people. When you are dealing with drunk driving, which kills more people than assault rifles do, they don't ban cars for everybody. They go to the drunk driver and say, you got to stop the alcohol. So this New York gun grab, where they are targeting people who are on these prescription medications, they know it's the medications. They can't plead ignorance any longer. We had that caller from Montana a while back who said it's right on that form you fill out to get your background check for a gun. Are you on prescription antidepressants? They know this is the problem. Their agenda is to disarm you, to take away your right and freedom to say no. No to gold confiscation, no to silver confiscation, no to your children being sent off to fight more wars to make the bankers richer. They're taking away your freedom to say no. And there is no freedom without the freedom to say no. You are all being turned into slaves. Forget all this nonsense about our soldiers are on the other side of the world fighting for our freedoms. Our freedoms are gone. Because the first and most important freedom is the freedom to say no, and that is the reason the Founding Fathers gave the people the right to keep and bear arms. To say no to the government and make it stick. Oh, my goodness here. So they know. They know this is the real problem. When we have drunk drivers, we don't take cars away from everybody. And we shouldn't be taking guns away from everybody for a chemically induced episode. If you want to take guns away only from people who are on these antidepressants, you could make a case for that. But wouldn't it be better to just take away these medications so you don't have to worry about mass violence with guns or knives or sledgehammers or cans of gasoline? This is not about public safety. It's not about crime prevention. It's not for the children. It is about disarming the American people. Because what the government is being constrained to do to perpetuate its power, what Wall Street is being constrained to do to perpetuate their wealth, are things they know the American people will not stand for. When they start looting your savings accounts, they don't want you to be able to start shooting the bankers. When they come for your silver and gold, they don't want you to be able to resist and fight back. I have to repost that quote from Solzhenitsyn, from the Gulag Archipelago, where he said, they had nothing left to lose. Why didn't they start fighting back? If they had just started fighting back against Stalin's agents, the rest of his agents would have said, I'm going to stay home. Too many of these people are getting killed out there. So they're back onto this whole situation there with North Korea, and it's going to be very dicey tomorrow because we know tomorrow North Korea is firing these medium-range missiles. It is a test. North Korea says it's a test. Everything that they've put out there indicates it's just a test. It's a demonstration. We have rockets that will hit what we're aiming them at. At the same time, the United States and South Korea and Japan are holding a major live-fire exercise in the same region. It's almost tailor-made for a mistake to happen. Or maybe there's another Israeli submarine in there that will sink a South Korean or Japanese ship. And they'll blame North Korea for that, like they tried to do with the Shionan. Lindsey Graham was telegraphing that yesterday. If North Korea sinks another South Korean ship, we will have to act. North Korea just issued another statement saying it's the United States and South Korea are trying to create this war. And they're absolutely correct. Because the United States needs a war with North Korea to open the door to war with China. And China really does have weapons of mass destruction. And they really do have ballistic missiles. These money junkies are apparently perfectly willing to incinerate planet Earth to keep their private central banking scam going. They've all got bunkers under their homes. The government has all these huge underground command centers they've been building for the last 15 years. We have one right here on the island of Oahu, in the middle of the H3 freeway, in the Ko'olau Mountains. You're driving through these tunnels, and surrounding the tunnels are these heavily fortified concrete structures that are clearly designed to withstand shock waves from overhead. And they've got this lame little sign on it saying Hawaii State Department of Transportation. Yeah, we're going to believe the state of Hawaii, with its financial problems, is building garages for the street sweeper trucks inside a mountain at huge expense instead of a little metal shed down there in the normal utility yard. You have to wonder about the mindset of these money junkies, where a world war is just a perfectly acceptable business practice. And they do see that. They've done it twice before. Go back and read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. These money junkies have sent hundreds of millions of human beings to horrible disfigurement and death because they make money off of it. It's this horrible three-step process. Once you have that private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, and the people are plunged into debt, and then when the people refuse to borrow anymore, that's when the Keynesians say government has to borrow on behalf of the people, and without their permission, I might add. Until it reaches a point where the people can't borrow anymore, and the government can't borrow anymore, and that is when they start a world war. Because war forces everybody to go deeper into debt to fight that war, And after the war is over, to go still deeper into debt to rebuild from the war. And when this horrible three-step plan is all over, the people have pretty much what they had before, except the graveyards are a lot bigger, and they're back on the hook to the bankers for another 100 years. That's the scam. And you need to remember, before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. And now we're on the doorway of big mistake number 3. Bankers love wars. Wars are the bankers' richest harvest. They don't care which side wins or loses, because both sides go into debt. And debt is what gives the bankers power over you. That's why Brown Brothers Harriman in New York was funding Adolf Hitler's rise to power. They wouldn't have cared if Nazi Germany actually won. It's completely irrelevant to the bankers. They just want that debt, because that debt is their power. It is the essence of the banking industry, to keep us all, whether we be nations or individuals, slaves to debt. Rule by compound interest. And as I said earlier in the show, it is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. Human civilization has evolved to understand that rule by divine right is a joke. It is a hoax. It is a fraud. We have evolved to the point of understanding that slavery is a fraud and a hoax. And we now need to take that next evolutionary step forward and realize that rule by artificially created imaginary debt is equally illegitimate. And I stress imaginary because all these trillions of dollars and trillions of euros the bankers claim we owe them never existed to begin with. That's what I mean about the 11th marble. It is that 11th marble that is bringing our entire human civilization to the edge of a cataclysmic fall. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And it's obvious tomorrow is going to be a make-or-break point here between the North Korean test firing of 2 medium-range missiles, the massive live-fire exercise taking place in the same region with South Korea, Japan, and the United States. The potential for a misunderstanding or a false flag cannot be ignored. And remember, we've already got Senator Graham out there talking about how North Korea, those dastardly North Koreans, sank a South Korean ship. And it turned out the torpedo that actually did sink that South Korean ship is one North Korea does not use. It's a German export model, but it is used by Israel on those Dolphin-class submarines that the German people have been forced to buy for Israel. It's very obvious. I mean, North Korea has come out and said it is South Korea and the United States that are trying to gin up this war. They're absolutely right. You don't need me to tell you this. Think all the way back to Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. It's the United States and its henchmen that are invading country after country after country to force private central banking on them all. And it's always with the litany of excuses. They have weapons of mass destruction. They have Al-Qaeda. They hate us for our freedoms. We must bring freedom and democracy and our way of life to these people. And they just keep repeating the same lies over and over and over again. And apparently the people inside Washington, D.C. are convinced you're all stupid enough to keep falling for the same lies over and over and over again. Or they think that you're such an American, you will believe the lies because real Americans believe the government lies. If you start asking for the truth from the government, the terrorists will win. Amazing stuff here. Now, a new study by Stanford Law School and New York University School of Law have come to the conclusion that the percentage of people killed by American drone strikes in Pakistan who are actually the intentional targets is about 2%. That means for every one intended target, the drone strikes are killing 50 others. Innocent bystanders, women, children. But remember, they only hate us for our freedoms. This is starting to make, this is making it look like these drones are no more discretionary in their targeting than a standard Mark 82 dumb bomb. just dropped on a crowd, and yeah, we got one of the intended people. Sorry about all those others. I remember, again, going back to Vietnam, all the U.S. propaganda about precision, pinpoint bombing. It was the earliest of the laser-guided bombs, and how we were only killing the bad people. No, wasn't true then. It's not true now. And remember, these named, targeted individuals are merely suspects by rumor and innuendo. The U.S. just sends agents out in Pakistan, and they got a bunch of money to throw around and say, you know, name somebody who's Al-Qaeda, we need this, we'll give you the money. And so you've got this guy who's got a bakery, and his business isn't so good because right across the market square there's another baker selling exactly the same product. So the first baker goes to the U.S. and says, you know, the guy over in that bakery, he's Al-Qaeda. He makes biscuits for Al-Qaeda to eat. Give me my money. And the U.S. sends in a drone, blows up that second baker, and the first baker's business doubles. Plus, he's got the money from the reward. That's how sloppy and loosey-goosey this whole death list is. And they'll send in a drone strike on this named individual who has not been given their day in court, for whom no evidence of actual guilt has been offered. And they'll take him out, and according to this study from Stanford Law School and New York University School of Law, they're taking out 50 innocent people. Now, if you're standing there in a little market square, someplace over there in the Middle East, and you're just doing your everyday life business, you're buying some loaves of bread and some tea and some coffee and chatting with your friends, and all of a sudden, with no warning, there's a horrendous explosion, and 50 people around you are dead. People you grew up with, your friends, your family, your neighbors. You might be standing there bleeding yourself. Is there really any difference between that and somebody who walked in there with an exploding vest? No, there isn't. They are both acts of terror. These drone strikes are an attempt to do to Pakistan, Yemen, everywhere else they're sending them in, the same thing Hitler was trying to do with the V-1 buzz bomb, the world's first cruise missile, and the V-2, the world's first guided ballistic missile. They're terror weapons. They didn't care if they hit a specific target. They just wanted massive explosions that killed people seemingly at random in order to coerce the British people, to scare the British people into turning on their own government. And by the way, it didn't work back then. Every one of these V-1, V-2 bombs that fell on Britain only enraged the British people and caused them to stand by their government that much more firmly. So why they think it's going to work in these other countries is a mystery to me. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this study that just came out of Stanford Law School and the New York University School of Law, which is reporting that for every one designated target who may or may not actually be guilty of any wrongdoing against the United States, 50 innocent bystanders are killed. Every single strike, on average. Now, to put that in context, that means that every single drone strike, just one drone strike, is killing more people, almost twice as much, as died at the Sandy Hook shooting. And yet the same corporate media that is going on and on about the terrible tragedy at Newtown and how we must protect the children and take the guns and that, when they're reporting on these drone strikes is, well, it's unfortunate, kind of shrug shoulder there. It's under investigation. The U.S. says they'll try and do better. And it's treated like it's no big deal. And it's one of the reasons I think the corporate media is losing their audience because of this blatant double standard. Dead children in the United States that can be used to justify a gun grab, that's big news. 50 innocent people blown to bloody bits in every drone strike, just a cost of doing business. As soon as these people settle down and accept their brand new private central bank, everything will be better. And it really isn't. You should look at pictures of Iraq now versus Iraq before the U.S. invasion. If you want to know if the Iraq war was worth it, ask an Iraqi. You'll get a really, really good answer on that one. We have a caller on the line, Alex in Florida. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Not much. Thank you for having me on the show. I like your program a lot. And when I listen to you, all I think of is what can we do? I mean, are we going to continue to let the banks just break the law? And are we going to continue to let our government just use surveillance tactics on us and the whole world and kill people with no repercussions for what they've done? I mean, basically, they get rewarded for all the wars, for everything that they're doing. They get the rewards for it.
Yeah, sadly that is true, but I'm not asking anybody to do anything other than to be fully informed, to share what they know with other people, and to basically be prepared for some very dark times that are coming. We don't have to do anything about it. All we need to do is stand up as a single people, one nation, black, white, green, brown, peach, taupe, and mauve, gay, straight, young, old, male, female, and simply proclaim to the world, we, the people of the United States of America, are no longer the walking wallet to pay Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. And you just delink from the system. You know, there are two pieces of common sense advice that I put out to our readership and our listenership and our viewership. And that is very simply, only have as much money in the bank as you need to cover your obligations, keep the rest under your own control, put some of it into physical gold and physical silver. That's one way to delink. Second of all, you need to understand that, violence is absolutely the worst thing that you can do right now. That's what the government wants.
I'm not an advocate.
No, I'm not either. I'm not either. But let me make this point, okay? Violence is what the government wants, because then they could suspend the Constitution and justify military law and crack down and the rest of it. They're preparing for it. They're buying all these armored tanks for the police departments. They're buying all this hollow point ammunition. The federal government is getting ready to declare war on the 50 states. Do not give them that excuse. But while I'm asking everybody here listening to this show to not initiate violence against the government, prudence demands you be fully prepared to protect yourself and your families when the government initiates violence against you. I think those are the two pieces of common sense advice we're putting out there.
So when do you think something like them turning on us will take place? Like what type of time frame do you think that'll
obviously, that's going to be up to whichever social political leader is the least mentally stable. At this point, though, it is obvious the system is coming apart. They're holding it all together through fraud and illusion and deception. There is no real fix to this Ponzi scheme central bank. They're just trying to figure out a way they can talk you out of more of your money, carbon taxes, rain taxes, air taxes, oxygen taxes, whatever they can come up with. And what's going to trigger the final collapse is the fact when they realize, we the American people, we don't have any more money to give them. We're out. They can raise all the taxes they want. They can declare there's a tax on blue skies and on clouds and the rest of it. If they can't physically get it from us, the whole system starts unraveling. They're propping it up with all this runaway hyperinflation. And I know I've been saying this a long time, and a lot of people are very unhappy with me because of this, but patience, patience, patience. This banking system, this government is going to collapse the way the former Soviet Union did. Our task is to have thought through clearly and decide for ourselves what government and banking system we will have in the next version of this country, America 2.0. Because if we are...
one more question. Okay, I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead, finish.
All right, yes, because when the Federal Reserve collapses and the federal government is taken down with it, there will be no end of carpetbaggers, well funded by the money junkies, standing up to say, we've got a brand new government for you. It's going to be great. Just sign your name here and we'll be off and running. And I guarantee you those carpetbaggers are going to be proposing a private central bank so that we have to borrow our currency from the bankers again. They're going to start the same scam all over again because they don't care how ordinary people suffer under it. It's all about maintaining power and control. So we must decide for ourselves. We must have a blueprint for the new America ready to go when things start coming apart. We learned from what the Russian republics did right. They kicked out their money junkies. They took control of their central bank. Putin paid off the Russian Republic's national debt in just 3 years. The last American president to pay off the national debt was Andrew Jackson, and he did it only by shutting down the Second Bank of the United States. So we
could do it easily if we quit charging interest, if we quit letting the banks make all the interest money.
Well, see, that's the problem.
Easily be out of debt.
They say, no, we can't, because that's the problem. When this nation was started, and the silver coins were the money, and the government created the money and spent it into circulation to get what the government needed, it flowed through circulation, powering commerce, and was taxed back to balance the books. Under that model, going to a bank was an option. You, the American people, had the freedom to choose. You could choose whether or not you wanted to put your money in the bank. And more importantly, you could choose whether or not you wanted to borrow from the bank. And because of that, banking was a naturally stable system. As the population got deeper into debt, borrowing would slow down, and you wouldn't get into a runaway crisis situation. But with the Federal Reserve, with the private central banking model, all currency in circulation is a loan from the bank. Most people don't even understand that when they are handling those pretty printed pieces of paper, the Federal Reserve note, you are handling the proceed of a loan at interest from that private central bank. And while it is in your hand, it is accruing interest to those private bankers. That's the difference between currency as a public utility and currency as a money-making private venture for the bankers. Okay?
Now, not to get off, yes, sir. Now, not to get off subject, but do you think that we will ever prosecute the perpetrators of 9/11? Do you think they'll ever arrest Cheney and Bush and put them in jail and have war crime cases against them?
Well, you know, it would be nice, but at this point, I really don't care all that much. You know, they got away with it for all intents and purposes. They got the goodies they were going to get. Dick Cheney's probably not long for this world anyway. I would rather put the resources of the new America into rebuilding the new America. Yes, we need to grab some of these malefactors, and I'd be more focused on the private central bankers than on Bush and Cheney and the rest of them. We need to make an example of them for future generations. We need to reverse this policy of the present federal government that bankers who are above a certain degree of wealth are immune from prosecution. It should be the other way around. The richer you get, the more you should be subject to lose when you are caught breaking the laws. We need to incentivize truth and honesty and fairness, and we need to disincentivize fraud and criminality and corruption.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day. I love your show. Bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the 9/11 perps at this point, we know Israel was behind it, and you know, I don't feel like going to war against Israel because they do have nuclear weapons. I'm more interested in getting these private central bankers and making an example out of them for future generations. Hanged, drawn, quartered, burned, and the ashes peed on by a rabid dog. That, to me, sounds to be about a just punishment for all the pain and suffering and global war they have inflicted on this nation for the last 200-odd years. So let's put our energy on that, where it'll do some good for the future. Yes, I'd like to see the 9/11 perpetrators hauled before a tribunal and given a really bad wedgie or something. It may prove to be counterproductive. Let's think about what is best for the future, what is best for the next generation, and focus our energy on that. And one more thing, while we're on the subject of hanging, drawing, and quartering. I know there are some guilty people out there who deserve the wrath of the people of the world. But as we value the founding principles of this nation, as diligent as we may be to go out and hunt down and punish the guilty, we must be equally vigilant that we protect the innocent. Because we know the guilty will try and shift the blame. Israel does that all the time. Anytime Israel is in political trouble, they try and intentionally blur that line between Israel's government and the world's Jewish people. Israel's government is literally setting up the world's Jewish people to catch the backlash that is building. And the government of Israel doesn't really care. They'll just use it as more ammunition. They're already screaming, oh, anti-Semitic incidents are up in 2012. They keep doing it over and over again. When we look at the evils perpetrated on the world, we are looking at the actions of individuals of power, people in government, people in charge of banks. Those are the villains. We don't need to look at some mythical Illuminati conspiracy or whatever that's unreachable, unfindable on the other side of the globe. That's a false trail. If you want to look at why the United States, the once greatest nation on earth, has been brought to such a low place, you need go no further than that bank in the center of town. That's where it is. That's where the problem is, and that's where we need to focus. And we shouldn't allow them to shift the blame and say, oh, it's just the lazy American people. They don't want to work. It's all those people on welfare and food stamps. It's all their fault, the economy. No, it isn't. The reason the economy has been destroyed goes back to that 11th marble. And for those of you who have not read that article or understand the reference, it's really very simple. Any 5-year-old child knows that if you put 10 marbles into a tin can, you can only take 10 marbles back out. But private central bankers believe they can put 10 marbles or dollars into a tin can or an economy and somehow magically get $11 back out. And all of this accumulated debt that we are told we and our children and grandchildren owe to these private central bankers, all of the billions and trillions of euros that the Europeans are told they and their children owe to their private central bank, that's that 11th marble. It doesn't exist. It never did. And that is the trap. When you have a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to the private central bank than is actually in existence. And that's why you can never escape the trap as long as you play by the rules they made up to enslave you with. It only works as long as you believe this is the way life is supposed to be. When you stop believing in that 11th marble, when you stop believing in artificially created debt, when you stop believing in the concept that they own whatever it is they're charging you rent on, that's your first step to freedom. It is not by mere chance that ancient religions, including Christianity, banned usury. They saw what it did to the ancient civilizations, including Rome. Rome was not brought down from without by invading barbarian hordes. Rome was destroyed from within by accumulated, unpayable debt. And once it was weakened by debt is when it fell to the invading barbarian armies. And that's another reason why America's huge price tag on its military machine is not a guarantee of victory any longer. It really isn't. Now, of course, Israel is out there saying, once again, that the U.S. and West must threaten to attack Iran within the next month. Israel is setting a deadline. You have only 30 days. You go kill them for us. Okay, Israel, here's your rifles. Here's your parachutes. Goodness knows the American taxpayer have bought and paid for enough of those for you. Watch your head climbing into those transport planes, and we'll call Iran and tell them that you are on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. I'm getting sick and tired of Israel always screaming for Americans have to go into Iraq, and Americans have to go here, and Americans have to go there, and Americans have to die horrible, bloody deaths against Israel's designated enemies. Remember what happened with the USS Liberty. Israel attacked an American ship, tried to sink it, tried to blame Egypt for it, to trick America into war on Israel's enemies. Here's another rule for the blueprint for the new America. Foreign governments get to fight their own wars. There's a problem with Americans dying in wars on Israel's enemies because Israel is making enemies faster than Americans can possibly kill them. Now, we are hearing from the P5+1 talks regarding Iran's situation that most of the P5+1 see that there is a good reason for the talks to continue. And an interesting little story, when it was reported by Reuters, who is not trustworthy, they had this sentence: the powers argue international rules apply only to countries that subject their nuclear work to stringent oversight by the United Nations, something Iran refuses to do. That is a flat-out lie. Israel has allowed, unimpeded, every single IAEA inspection that is required under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. What they will not allow, and should not allow, and are not obligated to allow, are random fishing expeditions into militarily sensitive areas. They have declared their nuclear facilities. They've been inspected. There is no evidence that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. But Israel, which has nuclear weapons, will not sign the NNPT, will not allow IAEA inspections, wants your children to go and die in a war on Israel's enemies. Enough is enough is enough is enough. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back. Last segment of the show. A couple of quick stories I want to fit in here before we head on out. Over in Great Britain, the British police are now monitoring the social networks, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else they've got out there, to try and identify people who might show up and protest at the taxpayer-funded funeral for Margaret Thatcher. Now, the corporate media is lauding her to the heavens about what a great and wonderful leader she was. Not everybody in Britain agrees with that, and so the British police are planning a program of preemptive arrests to make sure that nobody shows up to challenge the official pageantry of what a great ruler of Britain Margaret Thatcher was. Over at Tax Prof blog, a little report coming out, probably didn't get a lot of coverage in the corporate media. The Internal Revenue Service is planning to reduce audits of large businesses in the United States by 18%. Got to focus on those little tiny people. Those one, got to focus on big businesses. We know big businesses wouldn't cheat on their taxes. What a ridiculous thing to be saying there. And, I mean, just strictly from a cost-benefit situation, if you're going to expend effort in auditing somebody's taxes, you should focus on the big banks, the big businesses, because they have cheated for far more money, and the recovery is going to be that much greater. But, no, we can't go after those big businesses. They have too much power. If we challenge those banks, the entire economy will fail. I got a newsflash for you. The entire economy is failing already. It has started to fail across the entire West. The instant they went into Cyprus and started grabbing the savings accounts, that was an admission that the economy has failed. Private central banking has failed. And they're just being bank robbers. It's a criminal system. They just hope you won't realize it's a criminal system because they're not wearing the mask or the stocking over the head that TV has taught you, brainwashed you to think bank robbers look like. The reality is, as we've seen, especially since 2008, the biggest bank robbers look like they work for the banks, because they do. Now, earlier today, we had some issues with Press TV's website being unreachable. It was on again, off again, on again. It appears to have been an effect of the large earthquake they had over there, but obviously with all these cut cables that we've been hearing about lately, it was thought that maybe somebody wanted Press TV unreachable while an invasion or attack is going on. Meanwhile, the French company Globalcast has shut down Iran's Hispan TV. That's now had the plug pulled on it. They don't want you seeing anything about Iran that doesn't match the propaganda. They don't want you to see what a really nice country it is and how happy people are living there. They want you to believe those poor Iranian people are just desperate for America to come in and save them from the evil Ahmadinejad and from their evil state bank. They're really ramping it up. I think there's almost a sense of panic in Washington, D.C., that if they don't get this series of small skirmishes merged together into a globally recognized world war, they're not going to get it. Obviously, I would prefer that not happen. We're in a race between what crashes first, the Ponzi scheme banks or the atomic bombs. I'd rather it be the private banks. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, hopefully keeping an eye on what's going on over there with Korea. And until then, stay safe, stay informed, share what you know with who you know. Please tell all your friends and family and social media about Republic Broadcasting and whatreallyhappened.com. Thank you, and aloha, America.